lot closer to home than many people may think. And this has possibly been one of the reasons that Palestine has united so many people of conscience all across the world. But it's also mobilized them to a degree that we probably haven't seen since the Iraq War. What do you think fuels not only this united front, but also the great level of mobilization we've seen around the world?
I think the images that people have seen, the fact that, we've always had this core group of pro-Palestine campaigners. Jeremy Corbyn, for as long as I've known him, and I've known him for a long, long time, he's always been extremely solid on Palestine. George Galloway has always been solid on Palestine, way before Palestine became popular, if you know what I mean. But what has changed, and it's changed over the course of the past, let's say 10, 15 years, and particularly since the siege of Gaza. You see, the thing is, sometimes there are things that we forget about, but the siege of Gaza in 2006, 2007, at the time I remember having a discussion at one of London's universities. There was a panel, and I think it was about 2008, and the siege had been going on for about a year and a bit. And I remember telling people about what a siege actually means. And I was drawing on my experience, not my personally, but my knowledge of what happened in Iraq when Iraq was under siege by the sanctions, the economic sanctions from 1990 until about 2003, for about 13 years. And I remember one panelist who was adopting an opposing view. He sort of flippantly said, don't worry. I mean, don't be so dramatic. This is not going to be a 13-year thing. And yet now it's almost 17 years. That, and whilst we become almost normalized to the fact that there's a siege that Gaza lives under, but for many people, and especially the young, who grow up with sort of absolute values of black and white, truth and falsehood, right and wrong, bad and good, that doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter whether they know much about the history of Palestine. It doesn't matter much that they know about the story of Zionism. It doesn't matter much that they know or don't about the 1948 Nakba. It doesn't matter. What they do know is, hang on, you're telling me that there are 2.5 million people who have been under siege for 17 years. Now, tell that to any 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, and none of them, I assure you, none of them, regardless of faith, ethnicity, creed, or culture, no one will say, well, that seems like a good idea. No one will say that. And you mustn't undervalue the intuition, the natural instincts of people, because those are the very first emotions that go through anyone's minds when they come across something as horrific as the siege of Gaza, for instance. Add to that the element that we have today that I didn't have during South Africa, and I had far less of during Iraq and Afghanistan in 2001, 2003, and that is social media. The fact that today people are exposed to countless images a day, to news reports by their hundreds every single day, the fact that people, as a result of this barrage of data and image and information and the such, have the feeling that they are there. And when you have a generation of non-indoctrinated youngsters who themselves are facing immense challenges in terms of their education, their liberties, what the world is throwing upon their young shoulders in terms of exposure and influence, and then they are confronted with the horror that unfolds before their very eyes. It becomes personal. It's not about someone else anymore. And that's why you and I, when we take the tube, for instance, or get on a bus, the most striking scene is how many people are wearing the kufiya, the Palestinian kufiya. And I've recently come across some adornments like the bracelet, for instance, or people's gloves, or, it's not just the normal kufiya anymore. People have taken this to another level. The watermelon. I mean, this has become almost... You only have to look around you at any public gathering, whether it be a bus stop or on the train or anywhere else in the park, and you see these emblems and you realize that this is something personal. It's not about something that's happening, a distance away. This is very, very much local, and people are taking it to heart. I've spoken to many. I've gone across the country and spoken to university encampments, and I've lost count of how many people have come up to me and say that they themselves feel offended, and they're not Palestinians, they're not Arabs, many of them aren't even Muslims, and yet they express so profoundly how personal this is and this has been to them. And that kind of reaction, that kind of reception is something you can never downplay. You can never convince this generation, oh, by the way, don't worry about it. It's happening, quite a distance away, and it doesn't affect you in any way. These people are already affected. And therefore, there's something. And by the way, Palestine particularly is totally different. I discovered this. I hail from Iraq, and I led that 2 Million March. And I remember that day as being one of my best days, one of my most glorious days. But I have to say that Palestine is absolutely different. The way people connect with Palestine and with the Palestinian issue is on a totally different level. And I think it's because of how deep people feel totally offended by what has happened to the Palestinians over the course of the past 76 years.